Hey everyone, welcome back. Ever find yourself slogging through a PCB design, wishing there was a less manual way to handle all the fiddly bits?
I think we've all been there.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, KiBot.
Formerly KiBot,
You
right?
got it. And we're going to see how it can seriously up your KiCad game.
It's all about automation, really.
Yeah, ditching those tedious tasks that eat up your time. Think generating files, running checks on your design.
Even wrangling 3D models.
And to make sure we're giving you the good stuff, we're going straight to the source. Excerpts from the KiBot 1.7.1 documentation. But, you know us, we're not just going to do a dry read-through.
Definitely not.
We're digging deeper how KiBot can actually change your whole approach to design, not just make it faster.
Because that's the exciting part.
I think one of the coolest things here is how KiBot's evolved. Like even that name change to version 1.7.0 kind of shows they're adding more and more power.
Absolutely. Just the scope of what it can automate now is impressive. We're talking about creating output files, different formats, all that, and then those crucial checks, the ERC and DRC.
Essential for a working board, right?
Absolutely essential. And KiBot doesn't stop there. 3D model handling, too. You can practically see your board before it exists.
That's got to be huge for catching problems early. Imagine spinning your whole design in 3D, spotting a clearance issue before you even think about ordering parts.
Exactly. Preventing those "why didn't I see that"
Yeah.
moments down the line.
Okay, so KiBot's got potential. We've established that. But let's get real for a sec. Someone hearing about this for the first time, what's the impact? How does this actually change how they work on a project?
That's the key question. Imagine working on a complex PCB design, multiple layers, tons of components. Instead of spending hours on Gerber files, those ERC and DRC checks we talked about, building a 3D model yourself, KiBot can automate all that with a few commands.
So we're talking potentially days of work saved.
Easily. Think what you can do with that time. More design iterations, exploring new ideas, or just stepping away from the screen to come back fresh.
So it's not just about speed, but freeing up mental space for the creative stuff, the problem solving.
Exactly. That, I think, is where the real potential of KiBot lies.
So we've talked about the why of KiBot, but let's get into the practicalities, the how.
Right. Diving into the actual usage.
And the documentation's table of contents is pretty clear. Installation, configuration, usage, all laid out nicely. But I gotta say, for someone brand new to this, those words alone might be a bit intimidating.
Oh, for sure. Jargon's the worst. Let's keep our learner in mind and break it down.
Perfect. So starting with installation, it seems like KiBot has a few different ways to get up and running.
Yeah, you're not limited to just one method. There's pip, pretty common for Python stuff, and even pre-built packages for some Linux distributions. Ubuntu, Arch Linux.
So no matter your setup, chances are there's a pretty straightforward way to install it. You don't need to be a command line guru.
Exactly. And that brings us to configuration. The documentation mentions a YAML file, which might sound a bit like stepping into the matrix for some.
YAML configuration files, a little intimidating at first. It's like, am I supposed to understand the secret code or something?
I know, right? But thankfully, the KiBot folks anticipated that. They have this quick start guide that's super user-friendly, walks you through the basics.
So not as scary as it sounds. Okay, so we've got KiBot installed, configured. How do we actually use it?
That's where the command line interface comes in. But honestly, it's simpler than it might seem. Let's say you've got your design and you want to generate a PDF of it. Open your terminal, command prompt, whatever you use, and type in something like KiBot I my product.kpcb output folder, create PDF.
Okay, so we're basically telling KiBot, here's my file, make a PDF of this and put it in this folder.
You got it. And the documentation goes deep on all the different commands, options, different output formats, specific layers, those ERC and DRC checks we talked about. It's all there.
Speaking of the documentation, I did notice they have these notes sections sprinkled throughout. One that jumped out, given what we're talking about, is the one on 3D models.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Especially if you're interested in that whole 3D visualization aspect. It explains how KiBot interacts with the 3D data from your design, which, remember how we talked about catching errors early? That's where this shines.
Being able to actually see your board in 3D with KiBot, potential game changer.
Totally. And even with all this, we're just scratching the surface. The changelog hints at even more features and updates.
The changelog, yeah. That's where things get really interesting. If you want to see a tool that's constantly evolving, version 1.7.0, for example, introduced these things called pre-flights.
Yeah, the pre-flights. I actually love those.
So break it down for me. What are they all about?
Think of them like pre-built checks you can run on your whole project with a single command. just to make sure everything's good before you go any further.
So those ERC and DRC checks again, bundled up.
Yep. You've got ERC, DRC, even one called Update Stackup. Make sure all your layers in the PCB are defined correctly, which can be a pain to track manually.
So instead of remembering to run all these checks individually, you can kind of automate the whole quality control thing with one command.
That's the idea. Saves time, sure, but more importantly, gives you that extra confidence in your designs.
Peace of mind, especially as designs get more and more complex.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where we see how KiBot is keeping up with the times, too. Another highlight from the changelog is the improved support for KiCad 8.
Which, for people who haven't made the jump yet, KiCad 8 is a pretty big deal, right? Lots of changes, improvements.
Big time. So having KiBot play nicely with the latest version is essential. It means the developers are on top of things, making sure KiBot stays relevant and compatible.
So we've talked about what KiBot is, why it's cool, how to actually use it. But before we wrap up, I want to zoom out for a second. Look at the bigger picture here.
I'm all for the big picture thinking.
We've covered a lot about KiBot, the what, the why, even dipped our toes into the how-to. But I think it's worth taking a step back, looking at the forest, not just the trees.
Absolutely. The bigger picture is key.
We've talked about all the cool stuff KiBot does. Makes KiCad smoother, automates tasks, even catches those little errors that turn into big headaches. But what does this actually mean for someone listening right now who's out there designing cool electronics?
That's the real question, right? And honestly, what excites me about tools like this is it's not just about speed, it's about changing how we think about design.
Ooh, I like that. It's like, what changes when you're not bogged down by the tedious stuff anymore?
Exactly. Think of it like sketching by hand versus using a digital art program. Both can make amazing art, but those digital tools, they unlock a whole different way of working.
Right. You can experiment more, try things you wouldn't have had time for otherwise.
Exactly. With KiBot taking care of the repetitive stuff, you're free to explore more design iterations, play around with component placement, maybe even try those kind of crazy ideas you wouldn't have gotten to before.
It's almost like having a design assistant, handling the busy work so you can focus on the big picture.
Totally. And that's where the real magic happens. Human creativity meets powerful automation.
Love it. So it's not even GST making the work easier. It's unlocking a whole new level of creativity in the process.
Precisely. And on that note, I want to leave everyone with this thought. Think about your design process. What tasks just suck the life out of you, the ones that take forever? What if KiBot took those off your plate? What would you do with that extra time and energy?
That's the question to ponder. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into KiBot. Hopefully everyone listening has a better sense of how this tool can not just help you use KiCad, but maybe even change how you think about designing electronics in the first place.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Don't forget, the learning doesn't stop here. The KiBot documentation is out there. Play around with it. See what you can achieve.
Who knows, you might discover a whole new side of yourself as a designer. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you in the next one.